Welcome back to another edition of the Pear Genius Podcast. I am so excited. It feels like forever since we recorded. We need to get back on track, my lady. We need to start recording almost every day again because I feel like I'm getting rusty. But welcome back to Lorraine. This is part 2 to our first interview, and this one's going to be focusing on spirituality and religion. And without spoiling anything, I don't want anybody to go anywhere. I think this is going to be a really cool thing that hopefully a really good topic to enlighten a lot of people. So I just want to remind everybody to go to LorraineWright.com. I'm going to put the website into the description and into the show notes and everything. So go check her out and go tell her how awesome she is. And thank you again, Lorraine, for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me again for part 2. It's very kind of you to invite me back again.
It is. I am quite nice.
The first one was so good, right? The first episode was just fantastic. So I have a question for you, dear, since you're the one who is like making the theme for us. Are you talking about spirituality and religion in the context of medical, like in the medical field, or are we just like blanket talking about it?
I think that it's an interesting subject to go over with Lorraine because I think that so many people are turned off from spirituality and religion. I think the religion people are turned off from spirituality. The spirituality people are turned off from religion. And so I said, why not put these things together and just turn everybody off? But hopefully everybody, sticks around and can see that maybe these things can cohabitate and obviously we'll tie it into suffering.
It would be important then for Lorraine to talk about her definition of spirituality and then your definition as well of religion. And then that way we have a better understanding of the context.
Sure. Do you want me to start with that?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. But your question is excellent because most of my conversations about religion and spirituality occur within the context of illness. When I'm talking with people, because my clinical practice, my lectures, that's what I focus on is in the context of illness because I'm focusing on the impact of illness on individuals and couples and families. But I'm happy to take a broader view to start with of all of that. So let me just offer you my current definition that keeps evolving about spirituality and then about religion. And maybe I can just say that really spirituality can live without religion, but religion can't live without spirituality. And I do make a distinction, although some people don't. Some people are very comfortable having both together. But for me, spirituality is simply this. It's about what brings meaning and purpose to your life. What is the meaning and purpose of your life? And how does that meaning and purpose in your life invite what kinds of connections and how you are in the world with yourself and with others? Whereas I see religion, many people have their spiritual lives manifest or blossom more within a religion. But religion is really, a faith community where they have particular beliefs, values, and morals, and within a particular tradition, and where spirituality, like I said, can blossom oftentimes within a religious context. But I see more that religion is more extrinsic and spirituality for me is more intrinsic, if that helps. So that's how I
absolutely does.
And I find that a very useful way to, when I have conversations with, people who are suffering with serious illness, I like to ask them, are there any spiritual or religious beliefs that help you during this time of coping with your illness, or vice versa? Are there any spiritual or religious beliefs that are not helping you right now? And even when people tell me that, I don't go to church, I don't consider myself a spiritual person, then I simply ask them the question, what gives you meaning and purpose in your life then right now? Because this is a very difficult one for people who have a serious illness or life-threatening illness where their life is changed forever now, where they're perhaps not able to be employed anymore or not able to hold their child on their lap anymore because of a disability, or not able to have sexual relations anymore. Then you want to understand what gives their life meaning and purpose. And especially with people at end of life, many people at the end of their life saying, there is no meaning and purpose anymore. I'm ready to go. And other people will say, no, that's not the case. I still feel that I'm still a grandma, or I'm still a mother, and I still hang on to that. But anyway, that's a little bit of an introduction of how I think about spirituality and religion.
Yeah, that's helpful. I really like thinking about the fact that spirituality can exist without religion, but religion can't exist without spirituality. And I think that the people who are facing critical illness and end of life, maybe they are sparked into discovering more about spirituality, and maybe religion takes a little bit of a back seat. What I see with religion is that it tends to keep people in this container, and it's almost difficult to step outside to explore this piece of spirituality or that, because you're kind of working within a set and established rules, so to speak. So do you see that at end of life, people are now all of a sudden more open to the idea of spirituality?
Very much, very much. And especially if there's suffering. When people are suffering, it seems to open the door to spirituality, because people start asking the big questions of life, like, why is this happening to me? Or how is my family going to cope caring for me as I become more ill? Or what did I do to deserve this? Or I've been a good person all my life. I don't understand why this has happened to me. And then there's other people that say, why not me? Why not me more than anybody else? Okay. So as a healthcare professional, it's very interesting. I find that we go through the door of spirituality through the side door or the back door, whereas ministers, priests, rabbis, imams, they go through the front door to talk about spirituality with. But health professionals go through the door of suffering. The door of suffering opens up the domain of spirituality. But it's interesting, we're having more and more research studies done about the impact of religion and spirituality upon illness. And some of the research studies mix spirituality and religion all up, and it's very difficult to disdain which is which. But it's interesting in those studies, and this is interesting for people who are very religious, that people who are very religious aren't necessarily, I'm not talking about within a context of illness now, but people that are very religious aren't necessarily happier or less happy, aren't more happy or less happy than people who say they don't have a religion. And they also find that they don't say that they're more content than others. Where religion does shine better, oftentimes, than people who say, I'm not religious, is in their community, in their faith community. Because when they're ill, or unless you live in a small town, faith communities are very good at stepping up and caring for ill people. They'll bring casseroles to the door. They will come and clean your house. And we only hear that, at least in my work, I only hear that repeated in small communities, small towns, small villages, because there's a strong sense of community. And where there's a strong sense of community, people rise up to take care, it seems, of each other better than in large urban areas.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. I remember when we stopped being religious, the first thing I noticed was the lack of community, that yes. I didn't have that support around me anymore.
Yes.
So if I did get sick, then who's bringing the casseroles? We don't have family in Alberta. So that lack of community was a big deal. And I feel like it's almost part of my spiritual journey that I had to have this hermit moment where I had to go inward. I'm like, okay, so now is the time where I'm focusing on myself and reconnecting with myself. And then I think through that, I will attract the community back in, not necessarily through religion, but maybe just in other meaningful ways.
Yeah, it is an interesting difference. And the other interesting thing about the research that's been shown around happiness is that people who are more religious, even if they don't believe all of the beliefs of their particular faith community, they find that the community and the resources within their community bring them comfort. And, I've been very interested, and sometimes I counsel people that have been having what they call a faith crisis. So whether they're Catholics or, Jehovah's Witnesses or even Buddhists or members of the, of the Mormon church. It's very interesting to me that some people having a faith crisis, but they don't want to stop going to church. Even if they say, I'm not sure that I believe in all the rituals of our church, or I don't believe some of the doctrine of our church, but I don't want to give up my community. So the community has a powerful, and it's hard to replicate that in many places now in urban settings. Many people replicate that by getting involved in sports, or getting involved in the arts. So you have a community within your sports community or your arts community, or going to the theater or ballet or going to soccer games. You create your community. But it's interesting how various religions create I was just at Safeway earlier this morning, and I was just talking to the clerk who's Muslim, and I was just saying, oh, how long do you have to work today? She says, oh, well, I have to get off early because there's a thing at our at their center this afternoon where they're all coming together and bringing food. And I don't know what the occasion was, but it's just another example of how important the community is, and the faith community.
Mm-hmm. I think that while you were talking, I think one of the interesting things about religions is there's so many of them that even if you outgrew one, or if your beliefs changed, if you did your research, you would probably find the next faith group that more aligns with what your beliefs are. And I think that's really what religions are. It's almost like a fill in the blank check boxes, like, oh, okay, you believe here's your religion, done. Like, that's what everybody should do. They should just fill out this test online. ChatGPT could probably make that tomorrow. And it's like, okay, your beliefs today, this is your religion. But like you said, what happens when you love that community and now your beliefs no longer match with that, and now it's a burden on your heart. That's an opening of suffering, of losing that community.
It is. It's a real loss. I've counseled people who have chose that they couldn't attend their church anymore because they weren't aligned with the beliefs anymore. But they really suffer. And they said, I thought I would feel so much happier. Eventually they have, but they said it was a real loss. And they kept going back to the biggest loss was their community. Sure. Because they found that they weren't connecting or, friends with some of the people the same, because they weren't seeing them at church or doing other activities with them anymore, that they felt a real sense of loss and sadness about losing their community, not just about losing their religious beliefs, but losing their community.
Right. And when you have different core beliefs, you're no longer aligned with those people. Yeah. So those people tend to drift away, and right? That's why we have tribes. That's why it's very much tribalism.
Yes. But it's amazing to me how people reconnect around their religious beliefs or their spiritual beliefs, or it opens the door to invite that when there's a serious illness or when there's even other kinds of problems in the family. Can I tell you a little clinical story? One of my paradigm clinical stories that I quite love.
Definitely.
For sure.
So this is another one of those families that I've never forgotten. This was a few years ago. A couple came to me wanting to discuss their son that they were very concerned about. And so I was listening to their story, and the story goes like this. Their son had gone to the park very innocently with some friends and found a suitcase in the park. This is in Calgary, and found $12,000 in this suitcase. So you could imagine the excitement of these young boys. So what did they do? Did they bring it home and say, we found this, or what should we do? Or no, they hired a limousine and went shopping. So excited about it. And they just had a great time. And I guess then they dispersed and they came home, and the young boy the son of the couple that I was seeing, he came home and was very reluctant, of course, to say where he got all these new clothes and what he'd been doing for the afternoon. And then they finally got it out of him. And they were very disappointed in him that he'd lied, that he hadn't told the truth, that he didn't want to give. There was like $5,000 still left over that they hadn't managed to spend. And he didn't want to give it back. He said, no, finders keepers. This is mine. I found it. So they got into quite a battle about, what is honesty, what is yours, what is not. Had this quite a big conversation with this young man. And eventually they were able to convince him that they had to go to the police and report this and give the $5,000. But he remained furious with his parents for having to go through that, and the embarrassment of going to the police and then going to the stores where he had bought the clothes, taking them back, and lovely shoes, and they had a great time. But he was the one that seemed to enjoy doing most of the shopping. His other friends didn't buy that much. They bought a couple of hockey jerseys, but they didn't buy much else. But this kid obviously had a fashion sense. He really went all out. So then they took him store by store, and he was pretty furious with his parents for quite a while. And the father said he was so disappointed in his son and so exasperated with him. He said, I did something I haven't done in years. He said, I'm a Catholic. I stopped by a Catholic church on the way home and I prayed for my son. Now, I just find those kinds of experiences so fascinating that it seems when people are at their wits' end, disappointed in his son, didn't know how to deal with this situation, frustrated with him, that he went back to old beliefs and prayers, and to try to figure out a solution for his son, to try and he said, I wanted to get some inspiration or what to do. And he said, actually, one of the inspirations that he got was they should go for counseling. So this is always fascinating to me when people have a serious illness, they oftentimes, or a heartache in the family or a heartbreak, that they will drift back to, previous rituals or practices that they had. And that is one of the things that we found in the research, that people will revert to practices that they've had, spiritual or religious, to help them in times of crisis. Yeah. But we also have that research in the States that says the fastest growing group in the States, when they ask what is your religion, is nones. Right. No religion. That atheists, and some people don't even like to be called atheists, they just want to be called non-religious. They don't want even that label because they think that sounds too religious to say that you're an atheist. Okay? But it is the fastest growing group in the United States. I don't know if we have similar research in Canada or not, but it's just fascinating to me that if you punctuate any of this around suffering, that every major religion deals with suffering. Every major religion has ideas and comments and epistles and doctrine about suffering.
It's funny that I can see both sides. I can see the kid's side of the story and I can see the parent's side of the story. I can see as a parent, where did you fail your son?
Yes.
Why does he not have that foundation of, even though no one's looking, you still should know what the right thing is. Like your conscience should let you know. Just like his friends probably held back and didn't spend all that money because, deep down they knew it's not theirs. It's not, something doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And the father, I can feel it in him that, why didn't my son feel that? Mm-hmm. And where did I fail him? That would be a hard burden to bear as a father. Where did I fail my son?
Commenting on the very thing, Alex, about, what triggers that sense of morality in us. Some people call that your soul or your spirit, or other people just prefer to call it your intuition, your values. But that's exactly what that father was struggling with. Where did I go wrong with my son that he wouldn't have had the excitement of finding $12,000, but then wouldn't have come home and said, what do I do with this?
I'm wondering if the father had experienced a moment in his life previously where he was faced with an opportunity where he had made a morally incorrect choice. And now the son was mirroring it back to him, and that's why he became so triggered by it. And I'm wondering also if the child, now who's to say he didn't go to bed that night and pray to God to give him some money because he just felt like spending, like being lavish, or just because he really wanted something. And then he goes to the park and there's $12,000. Well, I mean, God sent it, so I might as well enjoy it.
Yes.
But the
I
lesson
don't
there
know what happened. I only know that the police told them that if the money isn't claimed after 5 years, then they could have access to it. So I
Five
don't,
years, 5 days, you mean?
I don't know what happened 5 years later, but anyway, it was quite a
Yeah, the cops spent it all.
story, but that was just so amazing to me that this father would read. But that is not uncommon. Many people, when I ask people, who are really very ill, do you pray about your illness? And many people will say, well, I don't know if I would call it prayer, or some people say, yes, absolutely. I haven't prayed for years, but I am praying that my loved one gets well or that I, recover. And other people will say, well, I don't think I'd call it prayer, but absolutely, I'm reaching out to the universe and asking for help, and that I can't do this by myself, and that I'm too young to leave my family. So, and anyway, it's just really quite fascinating when people are ill, how they will look for spiritual guidance or fall to their religious practices to help them.
Absolutely. And I think that what's really happening is that they're coming back to themselves, because whether you're praying to God or you're connecting with the universe or you're asking your ancestors to step in, what you're really doing is connecting back to that space of knowing within you that there is something more, that you're actually never alone, and that you have access to help all the time. And how often then do we think, nuts, I wish I would have tapped into that sooner, instead of in this moment of crisis.
We always wait till our back's against the wall and there's nowhere left to turn. And that's where you can't distract yourself enough. It's over. All the distractions are done, and you have to, look at yourself in the mirror and try and figure your stuff out and pray and really connect with yourself, because I mean, really, the only thing that matters is your health, really, because everything else is A, B, or C decisions. But if you don't have your health, then, I mean, none of those other decisions tomorrow or the day after matter, right?
Well, it's fascinating to me that, like I think I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that all the great religions, it's all revolves around suffering, and the same with illness. It seems that when there's deep suffering, this is when people are most open to, their spirituality again, or at least asking those questions again. And especially if you're at end of life, people revisit those questions about, is there life after death, or how, what is this going to be like at the end? They want to know what the dying process is like, and, who will be there and who will not be there, and, to comfort them and to be with them at the end of life. But even before that, I mean, I remember one young man I worked with who, I don't know if I mentioned him in my last time we chatted, but this was a young man with a very severe life-threatening illness. He had a very severe neurological condition. And he was in his 30s, and he was out of sync with everybody in his age group, because all his friends, of course, were working and having families and traveling, like people do in their 30s. And he wasn't able to do any of those things anymore. He was at home and alone. And so when I asked him, who do you speak to in a day? He said, the only people I speak to is I get a phone call from my wife every lunchtime, because she had to provide now for the family, for the two of them. And he said, and I speak to God. He said, I haven't spoke to God, in my lifetime before, but now that's who I call out to during the day when I'm alone. So you can see how, and being out of sync, this is really one of the sad things when a serious illness hits a young person. They don't have the developmental resources or the financial resources oftentimes, or the emotional resources to deal with such a tragedy. So here was this young man with this neurological condition. And they also told me another very interesting thing, that he stopped going, when friends would go on a trip and then they'd invite them to come over and look at their slides or look at their photos. And he said, I can't go to those anymore. I can't, because it's just another reminder of the things that I can't do. Whereas if it happens to somebody, that's 80, they're much, they're more reminiscing about their life and the good times that they had, maybe sometimes some things of regret. But most people, when they're older and dying, are able to find peace around it much more easily and quickly than someone who's very young and in his 30s and out of sync. And he was very concerned about, they didn't have children as yet, but he was very concerned about that he was going to be leaving his young wife, was going to be a widow with very little financial resources. So very interesting it's just the kinds of questions that you can ask. So who do you, when you're alone all day, your friends are working, your wife is working, who do you speak to in a day? He said, I speak to God and I speak to my wife. So these are the kinds of touching stories and conversations that I have with people.
And I think that what that highlights is, thank goodness for suffering, because it allows us to make the connections that we might have gotten derailed from. Our soul mission his soul mission might have been to establish a really strong connection with God. And that's the way his soul wanted to expand in this lifetime. And that could only be achieved through suffering. That was the opening to it. So I think that while so many people don't want to experience suffering and avoid it at all costs, if we could shift the perspective and say, thank you, after the initial shock of it, right? Thank you for the moment of suffering, because.
Yes, I don't know if you ever saw that. There was a little interview with Anderson Cooper and, one of the late night talk show comedians, Stephen Colbert. And Anderson Cooper lost his father when he was just 10 years old, and then a brother who later sadly died by suicide. And Stephen Colbert lost his father and I forget if it was one or two brothers in a plane crash when he was a young man. And Anderson Cooper has a podcast about grieving. And so he was asking Stephen Colbert about something that Stephen Colbert had said once about, these are the gifts in the end that are given you. And it was all just what you're saying, Kat. It was all about the gifts that are given sometimes around suffering, and to embrace those because they have brought you to the person that you now are. Okay. And the Buddhists have when you think of the Buddha himself, okay, the Buddhists teach that all life is suffering. And it's how we learn to manage it and respond to it. And the Buddha himself was living in a very palatial setting as a young child. And it wasn't till he came out onto the streets and witnessed suffering of those that didn't have as much. And that transformed him. And many people that I've worked with will say that their suffering has transformed them, that they are different people now because of going through this living with chronic pain, or living with, a chronic illness or an end of life illness or whatever it may be, that it is transformative. And that's why members suffer so much, because witnessing a loved one suffering is a very difficult thing. It's heart-wrenching. And I oftentimes find when I'm working with people, the person with the illness is not the person who is suffering the most. I always like to ask that question, who in the family is suffering the most? And it's rarely the person, I'm not saying oftentimes the person with the illness has maybe the most physical suffering, but in terms of emotional or spiritual suffering, it is more often that it's another family member, because to be a witness to suffering is very difficult. You suffer a lot. I certainly know that from my own experiences with parents and friends, losing them.
I just had my aha moment, Lorraine, while you were talking, and I almost hit myself in the forehead, because your website, it says the right perspective. And I would say that one of the hardest things to do is to see the silver lining, is to see the perspective of what this is doing for you, that it is not. And I think that's probably, that is your superpower, is to sit with these families, to sit with the ones who suffer the most and help them see the right perspective. Yes. And I think it's very fitting that's, the name of your website and the name of your business. And because I don't know, there's just something in that insane, intense pain that you get taken away from it, and you need a guide to help get you back to see the blessing in it.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's transformed me. I mean, listening to hundreds of stories of suffering over 40, 45 years, absolutely, I'm a different person than I would have been if I would have been an accountant all these years. I mean, we need accountants. I'm not disparaging accountants, but to listen to stories of suffering changes you as a person and transforms you and softens you. And it's helped me to be much less judgmental. When I was a younger person, I used to be judgmental about whose suffering was the worst. Like, oh, well, that suffering is not as bad as, you're suffering around that problem. That's not as bad as what this family is suffering who's lost a child, so you make judgments. But I had maybe I can tell you a little story about a nursing student that I had that I was so admiring of how she came to this. So she was a very bright pediatric nurse, and she was doing her master's degree and wanted to gain more skills about involving families in her practice and how to talk to families who had very serious, whose children were very ill. And so she came to our clinic and she was doing her practicum. And at the end of the first practicum, she knocked on my door and came in and said, I don't want to continue anymore. I want to stop, specializing and learning more about family nursing and involving families in my practice. So I said, wow. I said, you're, so bright and capable. How did you come to this? She said, well, listening to different families, she said, I work with families where their children have cancer, and these are very ill children. And we see some patients like that in your clinic. But because I had students from different areas of nursing, they would be coming with other kinds of problems too. And she said, when some of the patients and families come in with emotional or mental health problems, I want to say, you don't even know what suffering is about. I know what real suffering is because it's with working with very ill children and their parents. So I said to her, why don't you just carry on for the rest of this term? Or this was sort of in the middle of the term, actually, she came. Said, why don't you just carry on for the rest of the term? And you don't have to participate or, because we would work in a little team. Whoever was doing the interview, the rest of us would be behind a one-way mirror. And I said, you don't have to participate, just listen. And then tell me how you feel at the end of term, and then we can make a decision whether you carry on or not. So at the end of term, she came knocking on my door again, and she said to me, I want to tell you how embarrassed I am. And she started to cry. And I said, what's happened? She said, I just have come to realize that you can't judge one person's suffering against another. And I have come to see that all suffering is valid and real to that person. And I feel so embarrassed now that I was so judgmental. And I said, you are going to be an even better nurse now because of this transformation of yourself, because of this awakening that she had. So these are what stories of suffering can do if you open your heart and your mind to it. Okay? But she had to open her heart to listen to the stories of suffering and not feel that one person's suffering is worse than someone else's, but to see that all suffering takes its toll, and how are we there for each other to walk that journey?
Yeah, well, that makes other people's suffering such a gift to others as well, even the people who are suffering around them, because oftentimes the people who are walking alongside the person suffering gets to have an awakening moment where they discover something. There's gifts in all directions of suffering. So I think that being able to flip it back around now, because we've talked about spirituality for the person going through it, what about spirituality and religion for the healthcare workers? How does that add another layer of healing and compassion to the workspace?
Well, Katty, you ask good questions. It's really important, but many nurses and other healthcare professionals do not feel qualified to enter into those conversations. They feel that, as soon as somebody says anything around spirituality and religion, they immediately refer them to the hospital chaplain or ask them if they, do they have a minister or a rabbi? Are they in a religious community that can come in and speak to them? But when I teach to health professionals, I'm always saying to them, you can talk about those because we come in the side door or the back door. You can talk about those things by talking about conversations of suffering. Because if you ask somebody, how do you make sense of this suffering? They will enter. You don't even have to call it a spiritual conversation or a religious, but if you say to them, how do you make sense of the fact that your child has this illness and other parents do not? How do you make sense of the fact that you're struggling with this multiple sclerosis in your 40s and your other friends do not have to cope with any? How does that make sense to you? So you're asking them their understanding. How do they make sense? What is the meaning and purpose? And then you can go into, depends on the time that each health professional has with their patient or family, but to ask them, how does this affect you? But nurses will always say to me, how do you deal with listening to all this sadness all the time? Because one of the sadness and suffering, because one of the things that I have found in my practice and when I do workshops with health professionals is and I fall into that. I'm not saying I'm perfect in that area either, even after all these years, but sometimes we fall into the trap of what I call the cheer up phenomena. If somebody expresses, I'm really sad about this or what's happening to me or this illness or this, that I'm at end of life, that we will try to cheer them up and say, well, just think of the good life you've had, or, you're leaving a wonderful legacy with your children, or trying to offer some, well, God only gives us, what he knows we can deal with. No, these are not the kinds of things that are helpful. We simply want to remain curious, or what I call curious compassion. Remain curious about what their beliefs are and what their ideas are. But it's not that we have to agree with their ideas, but we do have, to me, a moral and an ethical responsibility to help soften their suffering. And you can do that by simply, because I believe that talking is healing. If you bring forth those kinds of conversations, you can. Because I know what my students used to say, and even when I do workshops with healthcare professionals that have had lots of experience, they'll say, but how can I work with someone, if I'm not religious? How can I even open up that conversation? I say, you open up the conversation by talking about suffering. And then you can simply be curious about, are there any spiritual or religious beliefs that are helping you right now? Is there anything that we can be doing more for you in the clinic or at home while you're being cared for or in the hospital? Would you like to meet with someone, a spiritual counselor? That kind of thing. But no, most health professionals, if you look at the research, they'll say, do you believe that spiritual and religious beliefs have an impact on health outcomes? They'll say, yes. Do you talk to patients and families about those ideas? No, we don't. So you'll get like 5% talk about it. 90% will say, yes, your spiritual and religious beliefs oftentimes can have an impact on health outcomes.
I think that a lot of it has to do with being able to, so before I actually say that, I should say that the right perspective is the higher perspective. So to leave your judgment at the door, to step into the room and hold space for curious compassion. That is really what it is to allow spiritual and religious conversation to happen, where you leave your particular religion at the door and step in to hold the space, knowing that that's just part of the healing process for this person, just to hold space and let them talk about it. But because then you're not saying, well, but my religion doesn't agree with what you're saying, because you've left that at the door already. You just put it into a little bag, leave it at the door, walk into the room, and now you're in a position of just holding space.
You would make a good health professional.
I would if I didn't get freaked out by blood.
Well, you don't have to just work where there's blood. No.
I think that it's so helpful, Lorraine. I love the story about the nurse, though, but I think that's such an amazing initiation into wisdom, is to seeing that it serves nobody when you're judging one suffering against the next. And same with I'm guilty of the cheering up phenomenon. I'm totally that guy. It's like, okay, I can alleviate your suffering by telling you a funny story or things like that. But okay, so I had to hear that today to know that it's okay to just keep a safe space for
and I don't want to say that there's, Alex, that there's not a place for that. There is. But, we did some research in our clinic looking at how we responded when people were really suffering, when there was dramatic, obvious suffering in a particular conversation. And in our outcome study that we did, the families that felt that we gave them good care and, helped them to soften their suffering were those families where we said that we acknowledged their suffering. If we didn't acknowledge their suffering and moved immediately to offering hope and healing and cheering them up, what did they say to us? You don't get it.
Yeah, you don't listen. You're not listening.
You didn't get it. You didn't really listen. But if you say to a family after they've told you, their suffering, their illness, suffering, their story, if you say to them, this is, a very difficult time that you're going through, or that this is a very heart-wrenching situation, or this is a tragedy, what your family has experienced, then they'll amazingly, so paradoxically, they will open space to you, to whatever ideas and your best professional wisdom and ideas and recommendations you'll make for them. But if you don't acknowledge the suffering, if you try to cheer them up too soon, if you try to say, to offer hope and healing too quickly, then they feel that you don't really get it. You don't really understand. And many times families would say to us, and still say to me, when I acknowledge their suffering, they will say, thank you. Finally, somebody is saying and understands what we're going through, that this is a very difficult time, that this is really awful what we've been through. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is definitely certain teachable set of things to say for health practitioners. Like if you took Alex and I as an example, and we were both nurses, his approach would be slightly different than my approach, where I'm very comfortable to sit in the deep, dark emotions and hold that space for them so that they're seen. That's my superpower. But Alex's is to lighten and lift. Thank God that we have Virgos and Scorpios and all sorts of different things within. But if we were just kind of given the context and the container to say, here's how we start, and then Alex, with his intuition, because everybody has access to intuition, says, wow, you need something a little bit deeper. Let me go get the Scorpio, right? But if everybody leads with intuition, just to be able to know what exactly that person needs. And if I can't give it, have a colleague who can.
And families do appreciate so much both acknowledging the suffering, opening space for the suffering, being able to talk about the suffering, and then to offer hope and healing. And many times offering that hope and healing doesn't mean you're saying that they're going to be cured of this illness, but that they will be able to manage or live alongside of it, or even if their family member is dying, that they will come to find peace in this moment. Yes. So it really is a both and, acknowledging the suffering, allowing opportunities to discuss suffering, and then offering hope and healing. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, wow. It's hard to talk about these things, but at the same time, I love talking about it because I need to hear it. And if I need to hear it, most people need to hear it too. And I'm really grateful that we know you, Lorraine.
But we live in a society where we want to cheer people up all the time, and we just want to be happy.
That's me.
One of the best examples of this, I don't do much premarital counseling anymore, but a few years ago I was doing some fair bit of premarital counseling, and then just in marital counseling, where I'd meet these young couples coming into me and coming to see me, and they'd say, well, we've been married a year and we're just not happy. Do you think we should get a divorce? And so then I would have to ask them, well, do you have the belief that you should be happy every day in your marriage? And yeah, we do. We think we should be happy every day. But I think that is such a comment on our society that I think why we don't respond, or we're not as comfortable with suffering in North America as I find when I go to Buddhist countries. I was just in Thailand recently. They're very comfortable talking about suffering and that life is suffering. But here we're under this cloud of the happiness industry.
Yeah, we're addicted to pleasure and
we just want to be happy all the time. And that is not life. Happiness comes and goes, just as suffering comes and goes, except suffering is not, it's not dished out equally, sadly. Some people, some families absolutely suffer more than others and have more adversity, more tragic things have happened than others, but everybody experiences suffering. Everybody. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. You know what I love about this whole conversation and having this time with you and getting to know you is that everybody that I talk to says, I don't want to grow old. I'm terrified of the healthcare system. I know it's going to fail me. I don't want to go in that way. And then I meet people like you who are making this incredible difference because it's not really just about the day to day, like the housekeeping and the systems and all that. It's you're making our healthcare professionals lead with their heart forward and holding space and having compassion. And I think that would be the biggest shift to our healthcare industry more than anything else. So there's this, you are the silver lining, which is one of the reasons the silver is in your brand a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think, as you get older, you come to, well, I'll tell you a story about my weekend that helped me to appreciate this again, about just the wisdom of being older. So I celebrated my 60th nursing reunion this weekend from the Calvary General Hospital School of Nursing. And so they had a big banquet on Friday night for all of us, and not just for my class, but for other classes too. But there's very few of us now. So in my class, 18 have already departed for heaven. Several weren't able to come because of their own illnesses. Others weren't able to come because they're caring for ill husbands. But as I reflected on the weekend, the three themes that came through was gratitude. Those of us saying we are really the fortunate ones that were able to be here and so grateful to have our health and strength and still be able to. And the other theme was losses, that all of us have experienced losses of family members and friends, and how we've moved forward. Many of my classmates are widows now, and talking about how they've dealt with that. And the other theme was dealing with grief, that grief and suffering, that this is the stage of our lives, that we're losing a lot of people. But it seemed that the theme of and the way of being able to deal with all of this is through gratefulness. And I just sensed we all called it was just like a love-in, being with these women that you lived in residence with for 3 years. You worked with them, you dated, you went out on dates together, you worked together, you lived in residence together, you ate together. These were very precious years from 18 to 20. And to look back and see that everyone has gone through their struggles, their sufferings. Some have come out the other side, better than some. Some have had more tragedies or more sufferings than others, but everybody has experienced suffering. Everybody's experienced losses. And there just is this feeling of deep gratitude and appreciative of your life, and that you can still carry on. And even the ones that were there with walkers and one with an oxygen tank, that they are grateful to be here and to still be living life. So, yeah.
Beautiful. And the ultimate lesson and goal is gratitude. And I think that we need to hear that more from the elders in our community, because it's a reminder to us to always keep the gratitude. And that is the way to manifest and live and be spiritual and religious. I mean, gratitude really is what grounds you in.
Yeah.
That's my grandma's secret. 99, and she's in hospice. Yes. And she's probably just about ready to get checked out because she's getting better. She's not getting worse. My grandma's the only person that's ever gone in and gotten better. And she just lives every day with gratitude and just such a golden soul. So, man, she should write a book before it's too late. But she'll probably outlive me, so she's in no hurry. But she has mastered gratitude, coming from communist Russia, and every day is a good day in Canada.
But I think it's you have to go through suffering, I think, to reach this point, to be able to be grateful, because you know what suffering is like, and to come through it and be grateful for these experiences, and that you've grown and transformed, and hopefully you've become, I hope in my life, I hope that my friends and family would say that I'm more loving and more compassionate than I was at 30 or even 50. Right. That there is the wisdom that comes and the appreciation that we are the lucky ones, the fortunate ones that are still here to savor this life. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, while I have you in this feeling of gratitude,
yeah,
I'm going to ask you the question that our last guest left for you. Now, she is highly spiritual, so it's no coincidence that she's left this question for you. So, her question to you is, what does space mean to you? I'm not talking about outer space,
right.
but what is your initial hit on what does space mean to you?
Well, the first thing that came into my mind was personal space. And it's so interesting as I've gotten older that personal space is more important to me than when I was younger. When I was younger, I just wanted to be with others all the time. And now I find that I have a much greater need to have my own personal space to rejuvenate, to reflect. I find that if I just am busy all the time, that it doesn't open up opportunities for self-reflection. And it's really important to me if I've been busy for a few days in a row that I really need to pull back and allow that personal space because it enables me to reflect and just to say, so am I pleased with how I've lived the last few days, or do I need to change something? Or how am I going to go forward now? So I think about, I think what came into my mind immediately was personal space. Yeah.
I love that answer. I love that it becomes this space of spirituality.
Yes.
Really?
No, I need that to reflect and just to say, am I the kind of person that I want to be, or do I need to improve on something that has happened in the last few days? And the more you're with others, you only know that when you interact with others, and you come back and you have that time to think about, okay, how was I in the world? How did I present myself? Did I like myself the way I was?
I love that answer too, because I should sit down after a few days, even just every few days, just check in with myself. Have I been pleased with how I've lived the last few days? Have I, oh no, I spent way too much time on my phone, or I did too much stupid stuff, and I didn't accomplish the things that really mean a lot to me.
Yes, exactly.
And I think I just fill a lot of my time with distraction, and I need to listen to Lorraine and make more personal space for me, and just to sit for a few minutes and contemplate it. You could rewire quite a bit just doing that, for sure.
Yeah, I like asking that question. Do I like the person, did I like the person I was out in the world the last few days? Is that the kind of person I want to be in my interactions with others, with the clerks at the store, with my nursing classmates this weekend, or,
Excellent answer. So do you have a question for the next person?
Yes. Well, let's see. Based on what we've been chatting about and talking about today, how about what is one spiritual practice that helps you to cope, to deal with suffering when it comes into your life? Yeah.
I like that.
Spiritual practice that helps you to deal with suffering.
I had a weird question for Lorraine, because it was the question that I would have, if I was the guest, I would have asked this question. It was, what are your favorite toppings for a hot dog?
Wow.
I don't know where I am today. This is just water, I swear.
Have you just been to Costco?
We were just at Costco.
At Costco.
Where you go, that's why you got hot dogs on your mind.
Oh, man. Stupid Costco.
Yes. I can't pass them up. $1.50. Where can you get a deal like that anymore?
Right.
Right.
You can tell a lot by what a person puts on their hot dog.
Exactly.
Well, what does it say about me that I put onions on my hot dog?
Oh, that's good.
It's because you're a spicy little number.
Yes.
There you go.
I judge people harshly if they put relish on their hot dog. Forget it.
Really? It's too sweet. Yeah, too sweet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You're done.
Brody.
Yeah. Well, Lorraine, I just wanted to say thank you again so much for sharing this with us. There was a few times where I could really feel it on my heart that, wow, I really needed to hear this. And I know that a lot of people out there need to hear this too, because we're all so busy living our best lives every single day. And then next thing you know, the emergency brake gets pulled. And now you have no idea what to do with yourself because you have been too busy to be grateful. You've been too busy to connect with yourself, to connect with God, to be grateful for all the blessings that you've had. And now all of a sudden you're in this, you're suffering. You are suffering. And now it's time to sit with yourself and find that silver lining in being forced to look in the mirror and spend that time with yourself. So, yeah, thank you so much again for
Thank
being
you.
with us.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about these things. And I just think it's so brilliant, excuse me, that you are offering this in your podcast, because in North America, we don't talk enough about spirituality and religion without it getting heated, without it becoming trying to convince each other of our beliefs.
Right.
Rather than being open to them and understanding that deep connection between spirituality and suffering. There's such a deep connection, and that it's fascinating to me that all the major religions in the world, that's their focus, is about suffering. Yeah. And even for those that don't identify with a particular religion, we all have to figure out how we're going to manage suffering when it comes into our lives.
Yep.
Because it will. Nobody is immune.
Nobody escapes.
Nobody escapes. I want everybody to go to LorraineWright.com. I'm going to put it in the show notes and reach out. Lorraine has amazing books. She has amazing resources. The blog is coming. Speaking engagements. Man, what doesn't this lady do? I mean, seriously. There's going to be a big statue of you in Calgary one day.
Oh, no, hardly.
It's going to be amazing. But, University of Calgary, I'm calling you out. I want a Dr. Lorraine Wright statue. She has earned it for everything she's done. So thank you again, Dr. Lorraine Wright. Thank you, Kathy, for joining us. And
thank you, Kathy, for great questions and comments. Thank you.
Yes, we want to remind everybody to keep living your genius, and we're going to see you on the next episode.